A next-generation sequel to a long-running work is often a phrase that fills me with dread, with most of these either devaluing the accomplishments of their predecessors, the new cast being hollow copies or rebrands of the originals, or simply being a forced cash grab to continue a complete story, with those that organically continue or improve upon elements from the original, inside and outside of the anime manga medium, being something most could count with only one hand's fingers. One of these successes that help set the bar for this type of sequel that doesn't get enough credit is Kinnikuman Nisei, which many may recognize through its localized name Ultimate Muscle, the Kinnikuman Legacy, although many introduced to this franchise through it may appreciate it as an okay action comedy. Being aware of the events of the original Kinnikuman manga run help elevate it to being a truly great sequel, which I'll go into for the Kinnikuman Nisei manga and its sequel, Ultimate Tag Team Arc, which I'll abbreviate to the Tag Arc in this video. To start off with the most simple aspect of its premise, the time gap and the context of the new generation being needed where the old can't pull their weight, makes sense with the idol chojin, now known as the Legends, being mainly in their 50s, with the long stretch of peace having caused them to relax in quite a realistic ravaging of time. In the case of Kinnikuman specifically, his physique going downhill is noted to be bolstered by the numerous injuries throughout his career, especially when removed from the first part of his burning inner strength throughout most of the Survivor match, of which is noted later in Nisei to cushion one from otherwise career-ending injuries, makes his past battles and struggles matter even more through his pathetic degradation, if anything. The camaraderie of the idol chojin, having been that of rivals come together against constant threats, also make many of them reconsider their place in the world, motivations, or past identity, such as Warsman being able to utilize the brutality he once feared without being swayed to become a Zangyaku chojin, or Neptune Man's desire to return to his glory days. This is done especially well with age and time, providing more depth to those that were either two-dimensional at best or had unused potential, such as the Ninja and Brocken Jr. respectively, the former going from a simple caricature to a vengeful mentor with a matured attitude towards their life's end, whereas the latter always being devalued compared to his peers has him reconsider his worth in a changing society, before placing his hopes in a student. On the subject of students, the new generation that succeed famous characters from the original establish themselves as more than a successor. Mantaro's different upbringing from his father makes him more strategic and spoilt than Kinnikuman, with his journey into courageously fighting dangerous battles being even more uphill than it was for Suguru. Terry the Kid's disdain for his father's deuteragonist role has him motivated to surpass him, while also coming to acknowledge the truth within his father's ideals, and Kevin Mask's rebellion against the ideas of the Robin dynasty's noble but strict history makes his arc in the Chojin Olympics revival of restoring their honor very compelling. There's then Jade, whose past before being trained by Brocken Jr. brings up the topic of Chojin discrimination, which gets explored throughout the later arcs, such as the Demon Seed or Robin Mask's backstory, which add a layer to Kinnikuman's world building through expanding the world scope beyond battles in the ring and going into how Chojin interact with human society. This theme of inherited ideals and difficulty adapting to new ways also carries over to the antagonists, such as Sunshine being unable to shoulder the Akuma Chojin ideals without Ashura Man, having him put his hopes in checkmate, or Kinkotsu Man's actions outside of the battlefield, making bone cold, determined to not repeat his failings, and showing the negative side of a father's effect on their child. These also make father-son dynamics a core part of Nisei's narrative, with Mantaro's arc being very tied to his father's legacy, in discovering the true worth of one he'd only seen past his prime, shouldering the expectations of others as his successor, and this ultimately leading to him proving his worth to his father on a more even playing field. There are then many others, such as how Ashura Man's fatherhood ties into his arc, or Neptune Man gaining a paternal bond with Mammoth Man, but I'll go further into that later. This causes a good portion of the initial narrative to be Mantaro's path to being worthy of the title Kinnikuman Nisei, be it checkmate, acting as an embodiment of the Akuma, Zangyaku, and Perfect Chojin's inherited grudge towards Kinnikuman. Scarface taking his research of the past to try and outdo the Kinniku clan where Buffalo Man couldn't. Bone Cold becoming the legitimate threat Kinkotsu Man couldn't be, beyond an incidental one, while Mantaro has to truly master the varied aspects of the burning inner strength, and Ashura Man embodying the experiences of the past to overcome, before concluding with the perfect mix of the past and future in the tag arc, with Suguru needing proof of Mantaro's strength as a Kinniku clan member, and the 5 disasters being the future threat to all Chojin. Of these, perhaps the best in Mantaro's growth would be against the No Respect trio, in Mantaro gradually becoming aware of the characteristics essential to gaining the burning inner strength that symbolizes both him embodying the ideals the legends held and outdoing them to some extent, by either honoring the memories of their generation or having the trio move beyond their misgivings, with them along with this arc providing the stakes of Mantaro's career being doomed if not mastering these traits even if he were to win. On the subject of honing skills, the unique blend of wacky abilities and genuine wrestling skill is a major appeal of Kinnikuman, and Nisei doesn't fall short here, with many of its battles having creative traits or showcasing the advancement of techniques to counter old staples. For instance, Washas, being essentially a toilet more advanced than his mentor Benki Man, required even more ridiculous strategies for Mantaro to counter him that rarely take hold of the toilet humor Yude Tamago can do. We're not as restricted in explicitity as with Shonen Jump. That said, I must go on a tangent with the shift to the seinen publication of Weekly Playboy that allowed for more freedom on raunchy subjects than may have been allowed in Shonen Jump during the late 90s, with things such as Mantaro's lustful behaviours leading to both some crude humour still in line with the original, and managing to further the plot in some cases. Anyway, back to abilities. Nisei has an even greater focus on how a Chojin's unique body affects their moves, such as checkmate shifting between his kin, knight, and rook forms, entirely changing how he can attack, or barrier-free man having pros and cons for both his nils and Chijo man bodies. As for the genuine wrestling skill, time having made the flaws of some techniques, such as the Kinniku Buster, even more apparent, leads to a greater focus on countering both them and their counters, with techniques such as the Muscle Millennium, OLAP, improved Ashura Buster, or Muscle Gravity. This is most apparent in the tag arc, where Mantaro makes up for his inferior power to his father, with moves specifically made to counter old generation techniques. Where things take a great narrative turn is with the Chojin Olympics revival, where the ideals of inherited generational conflicts are at their most blatant. There are minor ones such as Terry the Kid fully empathizing with his dad, Washas doing his best to surpass Benki Man, Barrier Free Man being the conflict between old and new personified, or Ricardo being torn between nature and nurture. The main meat of the arc is the build-up for Mantaro vs Kevin Mask. I've talked in other videos of how having a protagonist having a long streak of successes being broken often has more impact than making their win-loss record very varied, and this showdown brings that to a new level, through both sides up until that point having perfect records, which has both their familial reputations be given greater stakes than most other similar conflicts. Without spoiling too much for those that have yet to read the entire series, the outcome is a great emotional payoff in both the victory itself and how the clash of legacies helped Kevin overcome his disdain of Robin Mask's style of parenting. Another thing highlighted in this arc is the importance of meat to Mantaro, as even though he was a useful coach to Suguru, the more hands-on experience from Prince Kamehame had Suguru be able to endure before being experienced enough to handle things on his own even without meat, whereas Mantaro, seeing the use in meat's advice, has him become dependent on him to his detriment. On the subject of Kevin Mask, his role as a rival is far more developed than that between Kinnikuman and the other legends. While his victories over many of them had them go on a path of truly discovering what they value and making dynamic growth, especially with Robin Mask and Ramen Man, it would be difficult to say a sense of rivalry between them remained strong as the story progressed, even with the attempts to reignite it in the Universal Tag Tournament. The additional focus on Kevin Mask's role as a genuine equal to Mantaro here shows Yude Tamago being influenced by later ways of writing rival characters that help provide an excellent payoff when these equal yet opposite forces have to learn to work together when facing the Demon Seed, with both working through their individual losses. Speaking of the Demon Seed, it's with the return of Ashura Man as a villain that Nisei encompasses many of its core ideals through showing a darker side of father-son dynamics, as one of a father outliving his son, and exploring the ideas of nature and nurture concerning previously undeveloped aspects of true Akuma Chojin. Before going over the tag arc, it's worth pointing out a few criticisms as a word of warning to those that have yet to read Nisei and may have preconceptions from the original Kinnikuman. A common gripe many have with it is how Mantaro's story, as well as Kevin's to some extent, overshadow those of the other next generation members who, aside from a few minor victories, ultimately end up jobbing to the villains, aside from the reformed Chojin in the Demon Seed arc, and even that causes Terry the Kid, Seiyuchin, Gazelle Man, and Jade to be sidelined there. This wouldn't be too big of an issue in itself, if not for an appealing quality of Kinnikuman being the spotlight its supporting cast are given, with major victories that advance their character arcs, or defeats that have just as much a lasting impact. This is most apparent with Gazelle Man, who may be one of the most egregious cases of the Wolf effect, starting off hyped up as the best student, only for a string of losses quickly making him irrelevant by the time of the Chojin Olympics, and not even bothering to go to the Ultimate Tag Team Tournament, which at least fixed the issues of the other supporting characters. An even more wasted character though is Hikardo, as him being the reverse of most other characters in the series in moral conflict, swearing to get his revenge, and being an excellent benchmark for the ideas of one's nature Ashura Man would later explore. His role in the plot ends with Mantaro defeating him, despite being the perfect villain to be part of the Demon Seed. There are also a few retcons within the series that are to its detriment, such as the claim the Terry clan don't have the strength to pull off the Kinniku Buster, liar! The Chojin Kyoto needed to reverse a Kinniku Buster not being a factor, and most notably, how the morality and identity of Akuma Shogun differs from the original. Aside from the Akuma Shogun situation, the other retcons are at least one that could have been smoothed over with a little bit more dialogue. There can also be how Warsman was initially one of the defeated legends, despite later events making it apparent he really shouldn't have lost, though you could at least chalk that up to his more disillusioned state at the next generation until tutoring Kevin. It's now worth going over the tag arc's qualities as a separate thing here, with the amount of content it has. An element it does well is fix some of the issues Nisei's supporting cast had in relevance and growth, such as Terry the Kid fully proving himself to his father, or the dark turn for Seiyuchin, presenting a route for the underappreciated side character. Many manga of the same tone seldom do. Of course, it does more to further Mantaro's arc too, in not only proving how much he's grown in being pitted against his father, but him moving from the immature student to a master in his own right through training chaos. Even non-combatants such as Rinko get more to her arc after having faded from plot relevance in the Chojin Olympics semi-finals, with her time interacting with a young Maddie, or her feelings for chaos being been far better developed than her occasional interactions with Mantaro, or her brief crush on Jade. These interactions with those of the past also allow for the next generation to gain full clarity towards their idols, beyond their retired mentor roles, with them seeing both the strengths and flaws of those they'd only seen an incomplete picture of before. Perhaps the most drastic of these new perspectives is that of an old Neptune man wishing to rekindle his reputation as a perfect Chojin, with the experience to be the leader Neptune Kin could only try to be. His effectiveness in bringing out Seochin's savage nature, showing his charisma, and later training of Mammoth Man, having him realize the worth of a parental bond, to make him one of the most nuanced villains in the franchise, and a more unique take on paternal bonds, with him experiencing the downside of forcing such a bond on those with animalistic instincts, to make up for having become bitter in not passing his ideals onto one he could call his own child earlier. In other words, you could say Nisei Neptune Man is a crazy cat lady's soul in a Gigachad's body. On the subject of Mammoth Man, he's fleshed out far more than in the Survivor match, with the innocence of this younger version being swayed to absolutes, showcasing his animalistic tendencies well, and it's been brought to light how amazing his record was in the Survivor match, when he didn't have a single loss that wasn't a double KO. On the subject of teams and dynamics, the tag arc also puts characters' motivations first, in having the teams for the next generation not be overly predictable as they may be with other works, having a child embody a parent's role. For instance, Terry the Kid purposely going against teaming up with Mantaro out of his own desire to not just be a copy of Terry Man, allows him to respect his father's peer Robin mask, or Warsman's initial plans with Mammoth Man being both a logical and ironic decision towards the one that retired him from the Survivor match. These include the decision to have the young masters reform, which was a good payoff for everything Kevin Mask was forced to go through in this arc. Another strength of this time travel plot would be there being many jokes concerning the differences in society, but not making the gags repetitive. For instance, going from something as simple as the advancement of cameras and phones, to those as comparatively obscure as differences in trends with women's eyebrows. The time travel does come with major issues though, since with it being a single timeline rather than branching off from changes, many of the changes end up being underdeveloped. For instance, Ramen Man's sacrifice affecting Mantaro's early career should also drastically affect the Survivor match, to the point it's difficult to imagine Kinnikuman being in good enough condition to defeat Super Phoenix without someone to counter Prism Man. Still, the repercussions of the changes to history are vague enough these additional questions don't constitute a plot hole, but exploring the paradoxes with more clarity would have been better. Maybe the revival run will do so, with the Time Chojin playing a major but far different role. Speaking of which, another criticism would be that the antagonists, Thunder and Lightning, are some of the most poorly written in Nisei. They aren't bad per se, and Thunder does get some moral conflict, but compared to the others in Nisei such as Scarface, Bone Cold, Reborn Ashura Man, or even Neptune Man in this arc, they are far less multidimensional in their goals or personalities. Thankfully, this is made up for not only by Neptune Man's effectiveness as a villain, but Chaos exploring the time charging concept well, and being one of the most unique supporting fighters in Nisei through his otaku habits and inspirational drive to push himself when unaware of his true nature, to make him what can be described as if Geronimo's ambition was combined with a history similar to Future Trunks from Dragon Ball, and a dash of audience self-insert elements done right. Also, despite the prophecy surrounding him being what would make his role generic at first glance, the philosophy of Ramen Man ends up making this more of an ideal for the future Chojin than a destiny for only Chaos to embody. One major criticism of the tag arc though is its ending being very abrupt, of quickly wrapping things up after the battle is won, that, while comparable to the original, lacks the sense of finality that had, especially when it came to a few character arcs, such as Jacqueline's growing feelings for Mantaro going nowhere, or the previously mentioned Ricardo plotline. That said, though not surpassing the original in every way, Kinnikuman Nisei is a work that does does an excellent job providing more nuance in many returning characters. Having a varied, well-explored theme of fatherhood maintains the creative spark of its predecessor, and heavily improves elements such as the portrayals of rivalry, the morality of the Akuma Chojin, or fleshing out elements of its power system more. Comparing it to Kinnikuman's current run though, I would say at the moment, that is better than Nisei, with its better portrayal of the supporting cast, what retcons it has not negatively affecting it, and better world building, with things such as further exploring the burning inner strength, or the lore of the perfect Chojin. Regardless, I'd say Kinnikuman Nisei is a must-read if haven't already viewed Kinnikuman, as a display of how a next generation story can be accomplished excellently. With that mention of the revival run, maybe watch my video on the perfect origin arc if you haven't already, and wait to see what I have next Kinnikuman Day.